There will come a time when you need a prerequisite for something even though the prerequisite doesn't exist. In this case, you can create a prerequisite using the prerequisite editor. I'm in the MegaView 1.0 project that we've been working with. I'm in the Redistributables view. And if we take a look at the top of the list here, we see that there is no prerequisite for Adobe Reader. In this video, we will create a prerequisite for that. Then we'll add the new prerequisite to the MegaView installation. I've already downloaded the Adobe Reader 11 Redistributable. I'll bring up the folder for that. It's here in the MSI 2013 Projects folder under Adobe Reader 11. And I'm going to delete all the files except for the document and the self-extracting executable. Now I'm going to bring up a command prompt window. I'll run it as an administrator. Here I am in the folder. So let's run this and extract the files that we need for the installation. And remember, I got these commands from the document that I downloaded. And don't be concerned that this document is for Adobe Reader 9 because it will still work with Adobe Reader 11. In fact, I couldn't find a more updated document. For some reason, Adobe Reader doesn't have one. Let's continue on. All this says is run this single exe with these options and extract the files to this folder, which happens to be the same folder. Let's do that. Now here's what we'll do. We will run. Remember, this is a single exe. The document got deleted. I'll put that back in there for you before I redistribute the course. We'll run setup.exe. And this is the normal Adobe Reader program that we want to use, but of course we aren't going to run it with this method. We're going to create a prerequisite for it. So let's cancel out of here. And I'll minimize this. Let's go back to the IDE. Now to bring up the prerequisite editor, we can just go to the Tools menu and say Prerequisite Editor. And when you bring up the Prerequisite Editor, it gives a default name to the prerequisite that you're creating. So the first thing that I want to do is rename it to something meaningful. I will do Save As, and this is going to save the prerequisite to the Setup Prerequisites folder for InstallShield 2013. And here are all the other prerequisite files that we have in our InstallShield interface. So we're going to say that this is Adobe Acrobat Reader 11 x86. I assume it's x86. I don't know because they don't say. Let's save it. Now we'll go through each of these tabs in the prerequisite editor and we will set the various parameters. On the Properties tab, we have a unique identifier for the InstallShield prerequisite, and when you run the prerequisite editor, InstallShield creates a new GUID code for you, so we just leave this alone. The next field is an alternate location to download the prerequisite if the prerequisite files are being downloaded. Well, we're not downloading them, but I'll put a URL in there as well. And a description, I'll just echo the title name in the description. Now on the Conditions tab, when you run an installation on a machine and you've selected to install a prerequisite, the first thing that's going to happen is that it's going to use the conditions in the prerequisite definition file, and it's going to test for those conditions and see if the prerequisite already exists on the user's machine. If it already exists, it doesn't need to run the installation again. So that's why we create conditions. I'm going to say add. And we have different types of conditions we can check for. We can check for registry keys, registry entries, files, file versions, or the fact that setup is running on a specified platform. We're going to select that a registry key does or does not exist. And then we have to specify the registry key name to check. And that's going to be this one, HKey local machine software, Adobe Reader 11, so forth. Check the following registry location on a 64-bit system. We'll just say default. And then this is very important. Run this prerequisite if the specified registry key exists or if the specified registry key does not exist. Well, if this registry entry doesn't exist, it means Adobe Reader 11 is not installed, so we want to run the prerequisite. We will select the second choice here. Let's say OK. And that adds our condition to the list of conditions, and we could keep adding conditions to where some prerequisites, when you look in them, you'll see a lot of conditions because it's checking different operating systems and all sorts of parameters. Okay, on the files to include, we want to add multiple files. We will click Add Multiple Files. And let's go to our folder, MSI 2013 Projects, Adobe Reader 11. Now we don't need to add this. This is the self-extracting archive. So I'll add this, 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 and this. Okay, I'll say open. That adds all the files. Good. Now on the Application to Run tab, it's going to give you the list of files that can be run out of the ones that you included. So we want to select setup.exe. And then what is the command line to run for the application? Well, we want /s pb/rs. And the first switch here is to run in silent mode with minimum UI progress bar only. And the second switch is to suppress the reboot even if it is required. We also need to specify the command line for the application when the setup is running in silent mode. Well, we'll just put the same thing. And down here, specify the return code in decimal. The application returns if a reboot is required. We'll just leave this blank. For the behavior, generally all prerequisite installations need administrative privileges, and that's selected by default, so we will leave that. The prerequisite may be optionally skipped by the user. No. The prerequisite should be hidden from the installation list. No. Progress should be shown in the prerequisite window. Yes, we want to select that. I think that's always nice to show the user what prerequisites are being loaded. But some clients I've worked with say we don't want them to know what's being installed on their machine. And if you have that philosophy, okay. Don't select this then. Now down here, this part can confuse people. Now remember, we're on the Behavior tab. If after installing the prerequisite, the conditions still indicate it is required, ask whether to continue the setup, abort the setup, or continue the setup. We will say continue the setup. And the second one is if the prerequisite appears to need a reboot. This is a real confusing one for some people. We can exit and resume on reboot. We can ignore it and fail to resume if machine is rebooted. We can note it, fail to resume if the machine is rebooted and reboot after the installation. Prompt the user only if no reboot is detected, but always reboot the machine and resume on reboot, and so forth. Several choices. Now these may all be confusing, but what's interesting is that I've used all of these at different times, and they actually have thought this through very well, but you sort of need to get experience with creating these in order to know when to use which one. In our case, what we're going to do is if it appears to need a reboot, we're going to ignore it and fail to resume if the machine is rebooted, but it will not need a reboot. On the Dependencies tab, some prerequisites require dependencies. For example, if we were installing SQL Server 2008 R2, it has several dependencies that are required of it. In other words, you need to have Windows Installer 4.5, you need to have .NET 3.5 SP1 installed, and in some cases PowerShell. So those are dependencies. For Adobe Reader 11, we do not need any dependencies, so we will just leave this blank. We're finished filling out the prerequisite, and we want to close the prerequisite editor. But it's very important, just like on a Word document or anything else, it'll have some indicator up here that shows the changes need to be saved. So we need to go to File, Save, and see the asterisk went away. Now we can close this. So you say, okay, we define the prerequisite. We're in the Redistributables view. We look and Adobe Reader 11 is not in the list. Well, it won't show up until we close InstallShield and come back in. When you open InstallShield, it will pull the list of the current prerequisites. So let's do that. I'll close it. Run it again. Open the same project. Go to the Redistributables view. Go all the way to the top. And here is our prerequisite we created. Adobe Acrobat Reader 11. So I'll select it. We'll say install before feature selection. I'll save this project now. And that's how you create a prerequisite. And believe me, this will come in handy, so remember that you know how to do it because it's going to come up sooner or later. Normally I would run the installer and test the prerequisite install, but I'm going to wait to do that until the next video.